Welcome to Om on the Range, where we share the practice of meditation, the wisdom of Western Buddhism, and the refuge of our community. Whether you are new to meditation or a longtime practitioner, committed or curious, this offering is here to share solutions, stories, and support. Happiness and better health are available to everyone. It just takes practice. This is Om on the Range. This is episode number 30 of Om on the Range. I'm your host. My name is Whit, and I'm glad to have you here with us. This week's co-host is Mr. Brad Laughlin. He is our first co-host to join us from the Southern Hemisphere. Brad is many things, but his work as a spiritual teacher and his willingness to share his wisdom makes him an ideal guest here at Om on the Range. Brad, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you, Whit. I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I met at Temple Buddhist Center. You gave a talk there this fall of 2025. And I was impressed by not only your knowledge, but also just your history. And also, as I mentioned in the intro, your willingness to share that. It really seemed like a passion. Obviously, you built your life around sharing those kinds of tools and wisdoms that can help people live a happier and healthier life. So thank you for doing this. I was hoping to begin with, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this podcast right here today.
Well, it's been a long and winding road, I guess. I'll have to give you the Reader's Digest version. So let's see. I was raised in a middle-class suburban household in America. We moved around a bit. And my parents were Christians, so I always had access to the church. I was always involved in the Episcopal Church. And I realized that it was limited, let's say, and that I always had a fondness for religion because it ignited something within me. There was something inspirational about it, something that drew me to it. And really, the long story short is, through a series of circumstances, I learned to meditate. And it was Vipassana Buddhist meditation. And I started with a 10-day retreat. And apparently, I learned later, you're only supposed to start with a 3-day retreat. But this was decades ago, before I think it was sort of just getting started back then. And they let me in. So I thought, great. And I had such a blowout experience. Those 10 days changed my life. I had all kinds of mystical experiences, and I saw films playing inside my head with my eyes closed. I was given all kinds of visions, and I went into the breathless state where the heart stopped and the breath stopped, and I went into these very cosmic, ecstatic experiences. And when I came out of that 10-day retreat, life was never the same, and I thought, okay, this is the rest of my life. This is what I've been searching for. Before that, I was an actor in Los Angeles in the 80s, and I started questioning, asking the bigger questions, let's say, looking at what motivates me. And I thought, well, I'll probably find those answers through divinity school. I thought going to a Christian divinity school. So I went to Yale Divinity School, and I really thought that's where the answers would be. And of course, I lasted about a semester. And the thing I took away from that was there was a chapel, and I would go into this chapel and stare at a candle in silence. Amidst all the busyness, the divinity school was all about mental concepts. It was all about the mind. And I thought, this is not what I'm looking for. At the time, I couldn't have described what I was looking for.
Right.
But I quickly learned that it was not going to be there because it was so mental. And I look back on this and I see that, just being quiet and still and staring at a candle was preparing me for meditation. And so that's my fondest memory of divinity school, was preparing for meditation. And then, like I said, I learned to meditate. I had those experiences. And the next step on my journey was I started reading a lot of books to try to understand what had happened to me, to make sense of it. And so one of the first books I read was Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, which I'm sure many people know about. It's a classic spiritual book. And I thought, you know what? I had a million questions, and I thought, I need somebody like this guy, but somebody who's alive. I want to be with somebody like this who I can ask questions of. And I prayed and prayed. And within a year, I met my spiritual teacher, and her name was Leslie Temple Thurston. I moved to Los Angeles to be with her. She was teaching meditation, but also primarily she was teaching the yoga of the mind, which is one of the four primary yogas, and we'll probably talk about that today, I bet. But the thing that happened next, since you asked me to tell my story, that's a very important part of my story, was that we fell in love. After about a year and a half of being a teacher student, we became partners, and we started a life partnership. We were a very unusual couple. She was 16 years older than me, and it was unconventional, let's say, especially the teacher-student relationship and all of that. But really, the love was so deep and the intimacy was so deep that we've had a life partnership for about 25 years, and it has since changed, and we can maybe talk about that as well. But anyway, I've become a spiritual teacher myself, and I teach the yoga of the mind. And so that's what brought me to doing events in the US and around the world. I live most of the time in South Africa now. I'm here now, as you said, in the Southern Hemisphere. Leslie was South African by birth, so we started spending time here. And really, I'm a nomad. I live part-time here. I'm part-time in the US. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I also travel. We have students in Brazil and all over Europe, so I travel quite a bit. And if left to my own devices, I would stay at home and meditate all day. That's not what's happening. So I'm enjoying the nomadic life right now, and that's why I met you in Kansas City.
So, a couple of questions. When you attended the initial 10-day retreat, had you already started practicing on your own?
No, no, I knew no, I really knew nothing about meditation at all. I just knew that divinity school was not for me. I left. I can tell you a little bit more of the story if that might help a little bit. So I left divinity school after a semester, and I thought, that's not for me. I'm going to start reading books. And I just couldn't find the right books. I didn't know what I was looking for. It was a great mystery. I started
Yeah.
reading biographies of people who inspired me. I started reading history books. I read all kinds of books, but I would get through a few pages and put it down and move on to the next book because there was no energy behind it. And finally, this went on for like a month or two. And finally, I had this breakdown/breakthrough where I literally was so frustrated because I knew I needed something, but I didn't know what it was. And I would never have known it was meditation. So anyway, long story short, was I threw myself on the couch one day and started screaming and crying, having like a childish fit, emotional release. I was just screaming and crying, begging spirit to show me the way. Like, what am I supposed to do now? And I stopped crying and screaming, and I got this very deep, deep inner stillness. And, it's very hard sometimes to describe mystical experiences, but I felt the presence with me at that moment, a very calming, very peaceful spiritual presence take over my body. And it was as though some force that I couldn't identify as quote unquote me came into my body, and I found myself literally standing up, unpremeditated. I stood up, I went over to the bookshelf, and I pulled out a book. And again, it was unpremeditated. And the book was Shirley MacLaine's book, Out on a Limb. And if you remember that book from the 1980s, it was a very popular book. And I honestly don't remember a lot of it now. I just remember that she really talked a lot about mystical experiences, and she talked about meditation, and she talked about channeling. And I had met a woman many years before who told me she was a channel in New York City. And since I was in New Haven, Connecticut, having just left divinity school at Yale, I called her and I said, "Hey, are you still a channel?" And she said, "Well, yeah." So I went into New York City and I had a channeled reading with her. And again, it was one of the most profound moments of my life because these guides that spoke through her said many things. They told me many things. And one of the things was, in my most recent past life, I was a Buddhist monk. and that meditation was to play an important role in my life, and that I needed to go learn how to meditate. And so that's why I did it, because it was suggested, and I got a huge inner yes on that. And then I found this place in Barre, Massachusetts called the Insight Meditation Society that teaches Vipassana. Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein started it. And yeah, so in the end, I did that first retreat, and I think I did one or two more after that.
So, a couple of things that struck me while you were giving us your past a little bit, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. Um, your history or your experience with trying to find some answers in books. I don't know if it's common is the right word. It was common for me that was also kind of the first attempt to find some meaning, some direction. For me, what I looked pretty quickly.
What books did you read?
Well, you know what? I had kind of the same. The only one that really stuck with me was The Key by Sherry Huber, which is a very short kind of a handbook, start it anywhere you want and can be read in 40 minutes. And so for me, that was the only one. That was the one that did help me move along. And it's not so much about meditation, it's more about what you get through meditation. But anyway,
Okay.
For me, reading, you'd read 10 pages, 20 pages, and just realize, hey, this isn't for me. And so for me, it finally became clear that I had to figure out a way to do this myself. And so meditation was something that I could do. I didn't have to pay anybody. That was a very big, because I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't have a lot
Right.
of disposable income to find a spiritual path. So I
Right.
found that very interesting. The other thing you mentioned was your upbringing with the Episcopalians. I think a lot of people, they first, especially in the United States, they turn to Christianity because that's prevalent. And they either don't like what they find or they just don't completely find what they're looking for. They're called to some sort of spiritual path, but they don't know what that is. And that seems to be a lot. There seems to be a lot of that in the Sangha. So I always find that interesting because sometimes people just have
Yeah.
a violent relationship to or feelings for the church because they feel like they were being held back, and maybe they were. But
Yes, I know.
go ahead.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I have my own experience, but many people I meet are like you're describing, where there was some kind of actually traumatic experience where they were truly blocked or put into a box or given certain rules where they could not be themselves and things like that. And for me, it was a bit different because the Episcopal, I don't know about all Episcopal churches, but the one I went to and the way my parents approached, it was not about a lot of rigid rules. It was much more about spirituality, honestly. I mean, there was the Christian dogma that went along with it that I had to shed. But it just, I'm not dissing Christianity or any form of Christian practice at all. It was very meaningful to me in many ways. It's just that, like I said before, I discovered for me it was limited. I wanted more. I wanted something, and this goes back to my experience at divinity school. I wanted something experiential. I couldn't have described it as that then, but I see it now. It's like I wanted the experience of connecting with the spirit within me. I wanted
Right.
to know, who am I? Why am I here? The bigger questions. And Christianity didn't answer that for me. I think some of the mystics, Christian mystics, discovered that. They found a way of discovering that. One, I think the teachings of Jesus are profound. He spoke so much about the heart and heart-centered consciousness and love. And I find that to be, that's really the common denominator amongst all religions, if you look deeply enough. That, my belief is many paths to the same destination, and that destination is love. And that's what it's about. It's finding that love within us, discovering that we can receive love, we can give love, and in fact, we are love. It's hard to describe these things, but the closest word you can get to that experience of inner divinity, I think, is love. And to live with an open heart. To most, shall we? I don't want to hog the conversation if you had another question, but I have something I want to say about
No,
this.
please go ahead. You're doing
Should
great.
I go ahead? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I guess, one of the biggest discoveries for me, and one of the basic principles of what I teach, is in every human being that's raised in what you could call the separate system or the third dimension or however you like to describe it, the heart, it's a very human quality for the heart to open and close with negative and positive stimuli from the outside. We receive positive stimuli, the heart opens. We receive negative stimuli, the heart closes. And that's just human nature. But what I discovered, and this is what I teach, is that there is a way to live with a permanently opened heart. And I think that's what Jesus was getting at. And I think that's what a lot of the religions are pointing towards, that we can have that. And that's a path, that is a dedicated path. And I know that it's part of Buddhism. I don't claim to be a Buddhist. I studied Buddhist meditation and I still practice it, but I've read some books, but I don't claim to be associated with any one religion. I just know that from the dabbling I've done in all the major world religions, is that it's all about love. It's all about opening the heart. It's all about living from the heart.
So, first of all, I thought that was going to be one of those talks where we started with impermanence and everybody, all the energy leaves the room for a minute because everybody's like, it seems like such a negative thing. But I loved where we went with that in terms of being able to develop the skills and the path to have an open heart, because I believe that's true. I believe it is a discipline. It takes, I'm going to also scare off some more people and use the word work to get to where you want to go. But it's such a great journey to make, and you quickly start to feel better. I think there are people that are drawn to these kind of journeys, and it doesn't matter where they start their life. At some point, they'll find what they're looking for and they'll begin. And I don't think it matters what the title you give to that spirituality. So I think that's really interesting. I think the other thing that's really helpful is that with, like I said, once people decide that they're going to make this trip, they're going to have to realize that you have to do it on your own. Actually, I don't know that you can follow people. You can certainly, lean on teachers for wisdom and to being pointed in the right direction, but you're going to have to make this journey yourself. And again, it doesn't matter what you call it, it's going to be unique, but it does all end in the same spot, in the same place. And I think love's the right word for that. So I thought that was really enlightening as a share. I also was hoping, we talked a little bit when we set this up about discussing a little bit about joy. This can be
Yes.
a difficult, it's a little bit like talking for 30 minutes about love. I think once you know what it is, you can have a pretty good conversation. But when you're looking for that, when you're searching, joy can be very difficult to find. It can be one of those topics or one of those things that people want to grab onto. So do you want to start by maybe just giving us a good definition of what joy is?
Sure. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Let's see, we have to talk about what it is and what it isn't, I think. Joy, in my experience, in my definition, true joy is a deep inner quality of joy that, you can have all the time, no matter the outer circumstances. And it comes through the spiritual journey, through the practices. And what it's not, we're not talking about the kind of temporary happiness that comes from the pleasures of the world. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, the pleasures of the world are wonderful and we have to experience those. It's just that if we rely on those, then of course, when that thing goes away, when that shiny car or the money or the partner or the house or whatever it is that makes us so happy, when that goes away, the happiness goes with it. And so that's the opening and closing of the heart that I'm talking about. So what I'm really talking about is this. I look at it. I look at joy as an experience that comes from the foundational journey that one takes. And the very first level of the foundation is what I would call inner peace. And I'm sure your audience, who are meditators and practitioners of Buddhism, understand what that is. We find a deep, deep inner peace when we get quiet inside and when we meditate and when we relax the body. So to me, that's the foundation for everything else, finding that level of inner peace. And then the next layer that comes from that is what you could call love, the experience of love. Love builds on that. We find when we have a deep level of inner peace, we can fill up enough with light and energy that we can then share our love. And we also can relax enough to receive love. So it's this sharing of love and this gradual comprehension and this experience that we are love. That's who we are. We're that love that we give and take. It's like the glue that holds everything together is love. And then what comes after that is the joy. The joy is the experience, the inner experience that we get to live when we've developed the inner peace and the love enough. And I think the other really important thing to say about joy, I think we tend to forget that it's the reason we incarnate in the first place. We come here to experience joy. Of course, we come to learn lessons, we come to have all kinds of experiences, but ultimately, we come to this planet to experience joy. And I speak from personal experience. What I've found is that even in challenging times, even through times of difficulty and change and so forth, we can still have the joy. I know we don't have a ton of time, and I do teach 2-week retreats on the subject. So this is a very sort of a
You've
high
got
level.
6 minutes, Brad.
Right, exactly. Let's do it all in 6 minutes. But I guess one of the other important things to say about joy is what blocks it. What blocks us from that experience of having the open heart all the time? What blocks us from that experience of living in joy? And I think one of the things, and again, I'm giving very broad brushstrokes here, so forgive me, but one of the main things I think is worry. And I would imagine if you take a poll of all the people in the world, especially United States these days, almost everybody is in worry to some degree much of the time. We worry about this, that, and the other thing. And it's sort of like the way I look at worry is that it's the water that the fish is swimming in. We don't even realize that we're in it much of the time, or most of the time, or all of the time for some people. We're taught, most of us are taught from a very early age that to love someone is to worry about them. And that's the irony of that, because worry is a little tiny dose of fear. And what's the opposite of love and joy? Fear. So it's really, we're being, the neural passageways in the brain, the wiring of the brain is so screwed up because we're taught. And I guess this is what I can come back to with all of these subjects. What I teach and what I've discovered for myself personally is that the work, as you call it, is so much about unraveling those knots in consciousness, those patterns that we were given, that we developed as children and young adults, and even into adulthood. But there are very practical, easy ways to unwind your mind, to let that stuff go so that we don't live in the worry, so that we can rather live in the joy. There's one more thing I'll say. I would imagine you have questions, but let me share one more thing. One of the other experiences, emotions that blocks the joy is grief. And I think collectively, as a country, the US, and as a world, I would think anywhere you go, this is probably true for the collective of that country, that we're grieving. We're all grieving the loss of a world we once knew. And I'm not judging that. It's actually a great thing that there's this massive, we're changing paradigms. We're shifting paradigms from the paradigm of separation into what I call the new paradigm of the heart. We're all waking up to this open-heartedness, living from the heart. And so grief at the loss of what we knew, grief in terms of loss, losing the familiar, losing what was known. We're entering into a time of great uncertainty and formlessness in some ways and great change. It's happening. It's been happening for a while, but it continues to happen increasingly. It's accelerating. And so what it reminds me of is an African grieving ritual. There was a woman, a friend of mine told me this story. She was at this African grieving ritual and she met a woman who, I guess the purpose of the ritual is that someone had died and they had a grieving ritual. This is one of the African rituals that they do. And so they were having this grieving ritual, and there was this one woman who was so incredibly joyful She grieved as well. She cried and lamented and so forth. But then she was in such tremendous joy. And this friend of mine told me that she approached her and said, "What's your secret? How, how can you be so joyful?" Because she was just so incredibly radiant. And the woman, this is an older African woman, and she thought about it and she said, "I think I can be so joyful because I have grieved so much in my life." And I know that to be true personally. I know that when we allow ourselves to go down into the basement, so to speak, and when we make the unconscious conscious, when we allow those emotions to come out and we give the heart its due, that's my experience. It's through letting that go. In other words, the principle is the more we dig out the basement, the higher we can go into the higher realms. You know, you can only go as high as you're willing to go low, basically. So the
Okay.
more we're willing to face the shadow, so to speak, and to clean out the unconscious and shine a light on the unconscious, the more we're able to ascend to the heights of consciousness. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I had not thought of it in those terms before, but it does also kind of align with some of the themes we hit on the show pretty regularly. And that is, the addition through subtraction, the idea that, hey, by letting go of things, if you have space and you're willing to sit with your troubles or your demons, that in time you become comfortable with them, and what's left after that process is joy, is the
Yes.
true self. So, just the idea of developing some space to have those experiences, or to have that relationship with grief. But I'd not ever heard it put just that way. So I want to thank you for that, because I think that's really valuable, because as practitioners, we do spend a lot of time sitting there and we're just noticing. And generally, we don't call up anything in particular. But I think that it's just human nature to just always be on the lookout for those things that you just aren't quite ready to face. And the idea that, hey, that's where the real understanding is, that's where the real love is, that's where the real change is really helpful to those of us who have not experienced that yet. So I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. I agree with you, Whit. I feel like one of the hardest things we can do in life is look at ourselves in the mirror. You know, it takes great deal of courage to look at ourselves with honesty and to be willing to look at what is in the unconscious. But it's the most valuable path. I think it's the most extraordinary journey of awakening, is to really get to know yourself, all aspects, and to welcome them and to allow what's there to show itself and learn to love it and learn to release it. I guess let me share this with you because it feels like there's one major piece that we would be remiss not to talk about. So, one of the key pillars of what I teach and what's been my own path is it's a practice that we call witnessing. I've found every single spiritual path, every religion in the world has some form of this. And the way I describe it is the practice of witnessing. It is a practice, and it's about allowing the emotions to pass through us while observing them objectively. So the witness is our objective observer. It's the part of us that knows who we are, the part of us that knows we are pure awareness, pure consciousness. We are the soul. We're not this body. We're not these emotions. We're not these experiences of the world. Those are all temporary. And so when we have an experience, when we have emotions passing through us, the practice is just to literally remind yourself, I'm not my emotions. I'm not my thoughts. I'm pure awareness. These are passing through me, and this too shall pass. And so that's, again, very, very brief teaching on a much broader, it takes sometimes we lead week-long retreats on that subject, and we've written a book about it and so forth. But that's in general, I think that's the main principle, is the more we practice our witnessing and the more we live from the witness, the more we know who we truly are, and the more we can live with that open heart, and the more we can live in joy.
that was beautiful and very profound. It also sounded very Western Buddhist. So
Oh, is
appreciate
that
you
right?
telling me. Oh, yeah. Well, The beauty of Western Buddhism is that nobody's really sure what it is. So evidently, I'm one of the few people that's willing to go onto a podcast and say that's what it is. So we're probably
That's
all in
funny.
trouble. Also, if I'm the spokesman.
Well, all right. Okay. I'll enter that territory with you, Whit. I do not claim to be a Buddhist scholar by any means. I love meditation and I've loved reading some books, but I don't claim to be an adherent to any religion at all.
Brad, thank you so much for getting us here. I was hoping in the last minute or so you could just let us know where our listeners could find you and just share anything about the work you're doing. And again, I'm giving you about 45 seconds to a minute. So best of luck with that.
Okay, quickly. Woo!
Yes, exactly.
Let's see. You can find our work, my spouse, Leslie Temple Thurston, and my work at corelight.org, CoreLight.org. I lead retreats here in South Africa. If anybody's drawn to come, I'd love to see you here. I also offer events in the United States. We have books, and primarily one of the main way we teach is through online courses. We have what we call the Online Enlightenment Studies. And if you go to corelight.org and you click on the courses button, you'll find our online enlightenment studies, which are video audio courses that are profound. I'll lastly mention we have a humanitarian arm of our nonprofit. It's called seedsoflight.org. And we offer services and support to the marginalized communities near our area here in South Africa, especially to children, orphans, and vulnerable children. One of the most inspiring things in my life is to work with the people here in Africa. And if you come see me in Africa, we take you out to the villages where we get to meet them. Can I share one last thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is the last thing. The other thing that's really important, that one of the things I do is I co-teach a course on our Enlightenment Studies page called For the Love of Animals. And it's with my colleague and friend, Anna Breitenbach, greatest interspecies communicators around. And so there have been movies made about her work, and Leslie is also an interspecies communicator. So one of the things we do with our course is teach about how this work that we've been discussing today on this call, the work of witnessing, the work of clearing our consciousness, how that lays a foundation for the capacity for interspecies communication. So if that's of interest to anybody, it's also one of the main things I like to do, talking to animals. And we do that. We meet a lot of animals here in South Africa on our retreats.
Brad, thanks again for serving as co-host and sharing your compassion and wisdom with us. I also want to thank all our listeners and everyone at home. Remember that Om on the Range can be found on Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube. Comments and questions can be left there, and you can email us at omontherangepodcast@gmail.com. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. This is Om on the Range signing off and wishing you happy trails. Thanks to our Om on the Range production team for making this program possible, and to Mr. Brad Athey for composing and performing the original music. And to you, our listeners, thank you for being a part of this journey as we explore meditation, Western Buddhism, and the path towards a happier, healthier life. Remember, less suffering and more joy are available to everyone. It just takes practice. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and keep finding peace in the simple, practical things. For all of us here at Om on the Range, happy trails.